You've reached the Signal Watch, movies, television, comics, and more. I'm your host, Ryan Steens. Join me and our cadre of co-contributors as we examine cultural artifacts of the 20th century, boldly explore the 21st, and try to put it all in perspective. Stay tuned. We're gonna try to make this work. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Signal Watch. As always, I'm your host, Ryan Steens, and with me today is
Simon Day. Hello.
And Simon, you have been trying to get me to watch this movie for about 5 years. It is one of your...
I feel like we say that at the start of every podcast.
It's true. But this is one of your canon films. I'm excited to get to that. And, it's a great incentive for me. A long time ago, and when we come back in 2022, this will probably likely just be the format of the podcast from now on. We'll quit saying it's canon films because everyone will just understand that's what the podcast is about. But it convinces me to actually watch the movies that people have been trying to get me to watch.
I think it gives it a bit more of an extra kind of like, it's special to me, so make an effort.
Yeah, I mean, I found the series so far to be, enlightening for me. The whole idea behind the podcast for me was always to sit down and talk to pals about, why are movies important to you, or what is important to you about this specific movie. And I cannot wait to crack open this egg. We watched a movie based on a book by Rudyard Kipling, if you want to tell people what it was.
Yeah, sure. It's so we're kind of also, apart from it being a canon movie, which I know is, my canon is getting very large, is also, I guess, like our second long awaited by me Sean Connery tribute. So we did Robin and Marion when Sean Connery died earlier in the year, and we're finally doing another Sean Connery film, but with added Michael Caine as an incentive. It's The Man Who Would Be King from 1975, directed by John Huston and based on the 1988 novella by Rudyard Kipling. And as I just said, starring Sean Connery as Daniel Dravert, Michael Caine as Peachy Carnahan, Christopher Plummer as Rudyard Kipling, and the great Saeed Jaffrey as Billy Fish.
It's a heck of a movie. I had, always heard about it, and it was definitely one of those, like, always on lists of good movies, and maybe it's fallen off because it hasn't quite retained its popularity as much as when we were coming up. But I'd seen 20 minutes of towards the end of it in college, and had said at that time, wow, this is really cool. I have to watch this from the beginning. I'm going to turn it off. And then flash forward to 25 years later, and I finally watched it.
Well, I think I kept posting the end on Facebook like several times when I was still on Facebook, just because it's a great ending. It's such a good ending. But the film, it's one of those films that I grew up with that was kind of on at Christmas, and it was the kind of film that your dad would love. So you ended up watching it with him. Probably, British Christmas, bowl of nuts, some chocolate, glass of wine. Well, not for me, obviously, because I was about 10. But you watch the film, and it was your dad liked Sean Connery because of Bond. Your dad liked Michael Caine because of Zulu and The Italian Job. it was a kind of family film. Although that's kind of funny in a way because it's quite gruesome. Um, but watching it yesterday, well, it's funny what you were saying. I kind of really wished you could have been kind of physically with me while I watched it because I would have loved to have seen your reactions to it. Because I think it's such a good film, and it's kind of like you said, it's kind of a forgotten film. The only place I've really seen it referenced is Simon Pegg and Nick Frost in the extras to their films. I think Shaun of the Dead and Hot Fuzz, they do a little spoof of this where they reenact some of the scenes between Kane and Connery and some of the dialogue, and that's the only person I've seen ever mention this. And I think partly, we live in this, ridiculous woke world. Perhaps this is frowned upon a little bit like Zulu because it is the exploitation of the third world. And if you really want to, you could attack it for being racist. And of course, there's two middle-aged white guys as the leads and hardly any women. But, apart from the fact that, I poo-poo all the woke stuff, they can sit in the corner quietly. The film itself, I think, the guys get their just desserts. This doesn't have a happy ending. So, really, they pay the price for their hubris.
Yeah, I'm going to let you dig your own hole on the wokeness thing, but but yeah, I mean, I do think that there is a thing that is a challenge in coming to this movie, and probably why it wasn't as big in the States, especially, is it is very much
English
about
as well.
It's very English, which is funny because it was directed by John Huston, but everybody else in this product, well, is Plummer?
Well, actually, Plummer's English. I mean, so just a little quick bit of background. This was had a huge gestation because Huston was trying to make it. He read the book as a boy, loved it, and was trying to make it for the 1950s. And originally he had Clark Gable and Humphrey Bogart lined up, and then they both went and died on him.
Yeah.
And then 1960s he had Burt Lancaster and Kirk Douglas. For some reason, I know he always struggled getting funding for this. That didn't happen. By the 1970s, early 70s, he was talking to Robert Redford and Paul Newman. And Paul Newman, bless him, turned around and said, "You need Englishmen for this. Why don't you use Kane and Connery?" And that worked out.
It's very difficult for me. I can see the Gable and Bogart thing in a black and white version of this. I think Huston, as good as he was out of the gate, needed to be at the point in his career he was to make this film.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine two people better suited than the two he got for what he wanted to do.
Well, I mean, there's the fact that Kane and Connery were friends as well, which I think really helps the chemistry on screen. Because I mean, Michael Caine in his book, I think maybe the book I Got You as well, kind of says was his favorite film because he said with most films, you're either trying to get acting out of the other actor, maybe they're not as good, or they're trying to steal scenes from you with all kinds of tricks, and you're trying to stop them doing that, or you're just trying to create chemistry, whether it's a woman or man. And he said with Connery, because they were friends, it was just very giving. They'd both just kind of give scenes to each other, and because of that, they'd work out so much better.
Yeah, I mean, it's a incredibly even partnership in this, and you think of partners on film, and generally you end up having to go to comedy partners, right? Like Abbott and Costello, where part of that the sense there is even the power imbalance between those two, and this isn't that. This feels like two pals who are up to no good. And they're
lovable rogues.
Yeah. That totally makes sense as far as trying to set the other guy up in the best way
Yeah.
possible with every one of those scenes. I think the colonialism is something that doesn't resonate in the same way here, and so
Yeah.
probably that is part of why it hasn't taken off as much. um,
Well, what I
we are
love,
at the end of the day, we're a former colony.
oh
And
yeah,
so
yeah,
when we
yeah,
watch stuff about about colonialism, it hits us a certain way. Plus, we have our own stuff that, when I was coming up, we were starting to reckon with movies like Dances with Wolves and, things like
yeah.
that. And we've had a very to show the colonist as, these guys, and to your point, are not shown as necessarily doing the right thing. They're doing
Oh no.
everything for hilariously selfish reasons.
Oh,
Um,
totally, totally. They're totally in it for the money.
yeah,
And it's, and of course, when Connery does get more powerful, he tries to be a good leader or good king. But I mean, what I love about this film is basically on one level, you can just watch it as a cracking adventure film. It's just, a great, fun, rollicking adventure film. But underneath, there's so much stuff going on about class and empire and colonialism. And I think there's what was in the novel and then what was brought in from it being made in the 1970s. Because by the 1970s, I think England was starting to be a bit embarrassed and also lose a lot of power. So you're looking at it through that kind of prism of these two guys are basically, we're going to go to this country, militarize it, set different tribes against each other, and then kind of sit back and enjoy the riches. It's total exploitation. And it's only the fact that they've got so much charisma and it is Michael Caine and Sean Connery that I think they get away with that to a certain extent. And Caine's the honest one. Caine's the straight thinking one who's like, we need to get out of here while it's still going well. Whereas, sadly, Connery starts believing his own hype, and that's kind of their undoing.
well, yeah, and both at that time, as they're about to part ways on that train of thought, both seem like legitimate options in the film.
Yeah,
You're not quite sure Caine would actually make it back to London with all of his riches.
probably not. Yeah.
And you look at Connery and you're like, well, you are actually trying. Like, that's not what I expected out of what was going to happen here.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's an interesting film in that, or story, and that he does actually try. He doesn't go full dictator on anybody necessarily.
Yeah.
The thing that they were kind of planning to do, they never really have to do, of pitting people against each other after, what they say, 6 villages or
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah. I mean, they're
and
both kind of fantasists as well, though, especially Connery, because both of them kind of say, when they first have all those women, Sean Connery, I think, says, which again is why these days a certain minority might complain loudly against it, but he kind of says, dip him in hot water and they'll come out like chicken and ham. And he's basically totally deluding himself that you could take one of these girls with lots of money and be accepted in modern, at the time, London society. I mean, like him and Caine are basically saying we could be the richest men in the world, but they still wouldn't be accepted, which is what they ultimately want. They want the Queen to pin a medal on him, and that's never going to happen.
Right. Yeah. And there's this massive layer of irony to all of that, in that they're really just doing a miniature version of what any colonizing force does.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah. I
mean,
mean, they basically, they are coming in and it's actually a very similar plot, really, to Touch Your Fistful of Dollars or Yojimbo, where they're basically they come in, make friends with one leader, and then just switch sides, once they've won for him, and then start again. So they have no shame, which is great, which is why it's funny. Where that's I mean, the setup of the film where he's and Kane's attitude again, which now would be frowned upon, but they're men of their time. The fact that he throws a guy off the train and then tries to blame him for stealing the watch that he's stolen.
That was
we watch
such
that now and we're like, it's so racist, but it kind of fits the time period.
Oh yeah, and it also tells us so much about the character. Like, you've seen this guy already be a little shady, but he's literally willing to throw someone under the bus for the slightest bit of upward mobility with what he's trying to do. And that was one of the funny things was he's when he's talking to Kipling there, to Plummer. I had never heard in the wild any of the like Masonic phrases, and I think the way they phrase it in this movie is, "Will you help?"
You met a man from the West, kind of.
Well, it's that, "Will you help the widow's son?" Or for the sake of the widow's son. And I'd always heard it as you're supposed to raise your hands and say, "Well, no one helped the widow's son." But it's all the like Masonic stuff of like, well, you clearly get this leg up. We know enough to know that. Well, there's no way on earth we're actually Masons. We're, lower class guys who, enrolled in the infantry and saw an opportunity here and have stuck around. And
and that's got a lovely through line in the fact that kind of saves their life later. Because, like they said it up early in the film. They say, well, Kipling says, well, we don't really know where, Masons came from. We think, it was set up, thousands of years ago here. And of course, that kind of proves to be true. So for a while, they're kind of riding on the back of that, to survive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, and it plays into a lot of the stuff with, and I remember thinking at some point, I think it was actually when they popped open the box and you saw the Masonic seal inside the box. And I was like, man, this movie sure is enjoying playing with lucky chances that these guys are going on. And of course, then Connery has a whole speech about it about 10 minutes later of like, well, maybe I am the God King. I mean, what are the chances that all of this would have ever happened? And I was like, this movie is so freaking smart. And I don't know, because I've never read the book, of setting all of this stuff up in the way that often happens in film, where, Indiana Jones is lucky with this or, lucky with that. We think of Indiana Jones as being a little bit unlucky, but it's more like his luck plays wildly on both sides. But these guys are, just like they keep having fortunate incidents happen to them that just seem like almost like just efficiencies for the narrative. And then but then they start talking about it. When Connery actually starts talking about it, it's like, well, I can see how if all of this stuff happened to pave your way to riches, that you might think that you are destined for greatness.
Yeah, it kind of grounds the film, the fact that they actually discuss and go, there have been a lot of coincidences. And I also love the fact that the framing device is kind of like, Kipling being told the story. We actually meet him writing down stories, and and then Kane kind of comes back and tells him, he says he's got that wonderful line, which is, was it three summers and 1,000 years ago?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure a lot of these lines come from the original novella, but there's some fantastic, lines in it. I mean, there's another one later on. How do you take 5 Afghans and 3 mules? And how do you get 5 Afghans, subtract 3 mules, and get 2 Englishmen left over? Well, the best one is probably like, we're not gods, we're Englishmen, which is the next best thing. So all these are fantastic. But the fact that it's got that framing device of a story within a story, plus, at the end where Kane's like, Danny fell for like 30 minutes, thousands and thousands of feet. you're like, well, if he's kind of saying that, how much more of this is exaggerated? Maybe, you know, because
That's
we're seeing
true.
his version of events, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but it's
The
kind of like it's just like for me, it's like a kind of perfect, just a perfect story. Like I say, it's an adventure story first, but there's so much stuff going on. I mean, like Kane's anger at the fact that it's detriments like us that built the bloody empire, which is so true because they're the bodies that are laying on all the battlefields, the working class guys, um, and this is their chance to get ahead, which they're totally going for with both hands. Um, yeah, like Connery says, I don't want to go back to London and just be opening doors for rich people and they're blousy women.
that really that particular line and that exchange really set up the movie for me.
Mm.
If
We're not
you're
little men. That's the quote, isn't it? We're not little men. We intend to
yeah
be kings.
there it's if you're coming at it and you're like, I'm just going to start by being offended by the idea of colonialism, maybe this
Mm.
movie's just never going to work for you. But hearing kind of that, like, how did
No.
this even happen, like, was the that joining the army and going overseas on behalf of your country, which is, by the way, exactly what we do in the United States for upward mobility as well.
Mm.
I mean, there's a reason we have the
Oh
GI
yeah.
Bill and we have all these like special home loans and special insurance and everything else that we offer to military and military veterans. It's not any different. It's just in the modern
No.
context. And we think of it as being this really nice social program that we have in the United States. But it was exactly the same thing for people at that time. And hearing
Mm.
Connery talk about, you know, man, I'm not going, I remember, I remember what it was actually like at home. This is much better. My chances are much, much better. But I know what
Yeah.
it's like, what box you're going to shove me back into.
Well, it's almost like a prison movie where, it's like the old guy in Shawshank, where he's an important person inside the prison, but once he gets back outside, he's nothing.
yeah.
Yeah. you know. And it's got some. I mean, we haven't mentioned the fact that this is very funny as well. They've got some absolutely hilarious lines. I mean, where like Kipling, is very studiously saying, telling them about Alexander the Great, having ruled, years and years ago. Like Michael Caine goes, "Well, if a Greek can do it, we can do it."
Oh my God. That was the yes.
And the story,
Yeah.
the story that starts the avalanche, where they're laughing about their captain who dropped his money and ran back up the hill, and all the Highlanders followed him. So he got like the Medal of Bravery. I mean, I mean, all this stuff is genuinely funny.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's unfortunately when we were watching it, they start, frankly speaking, in very conversational tones in the film.
With
And so
subtitles.
some of it, yeah, so I tried. And Amazon has started doing this thing, and I noticed it when we were doing the Miller's Crossing podcast, um, where they have subtitles, but they are in no way complete,
That's not
and
good.
they sometimes are interpretive of what the person is saying. So Michael
Mm.
Caine
He
can
talks
fit
really
in.
fast as well.
He does. He can fit in like 40 words into like 10 seconds. And so they'll basically just put whatever the idea of what he was saying was up as the subtitle, which is
Well,
not correct,
interestingly,
right? I mean, they
no.
shouldn't be doing it. And Jamie and I had the subtitles on for literally 1 minute, and we said, well, this isn't going to work. Like, we're missing all of the Michael Caineisms.
It's
And
making it
we
more confusing, probably.
yeah, because then your brain's like trying to go, wait, what? Because you're looking at the subtitles and then trying to listen to them at the same time. So yeah, we turned them off pretty quick, but I did miss some of the nuance of, kind of go, oh yeah, that was funny. Like when my brain finally caught up with the story on the Highlanders.
Yeah.
Like they were like laughing, and the snow was falling at that point, and my brain finally clicked into gear. The thing with the Greek thing was like such a like Michael Caine moment, and it's such a little brief thing. I was dying. Yeah, it absolutely, and that's kind of the thing is it's not like Waiting for Godot or something like that, but it is these
Oh
kind
no.
of two dudes who are hilarious in this like really quiet way,
Well, it's
bumblefucking
like
their way through becoming kings. It's a great idea. I mean, just in general.
oh yeah, and it is. I mean, I can see how it could be construed as racist because I mean, obviously, how they treat the natives, they literally call them savages,
Well, they
and
are racist. I mean, the movie
yeah,
isn't necessarily they are as characters,
yeah,
and Michael Caine
well,
is
yeah.
in real life not. I mean, and
Oh no.
that's a distinction you have to make.
Well, actually, his wife played Roxanne because John Huston, I think, had a hard so Roald Dahl's daughter, and he said, I need somebody ethnic. This isn't working. She doesn't look like she's from that area. And he went round for dinner at Michael Caine's house, and Michael Caine, his wife is obviously like from I think Indian descent,
Yeah, Shakira.
and
Yeah.
he was like, "Do you want to be in the film?" And I think him and Michael Caine kind of wore her down and persuaded her, and she said she kind of it was the most terrifying experience of her life, and she never did it again. But that kind of actually adds into the film because she's supposed to be terrified most of the time.
Oh yeah, she sells it. There's no question. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's one of those funny things because I'd always heard about the beautiful wife of Michael Caine, and it's like, and then this woman shows up on screen, and you're like, wow, that woman's really gorgeous. And then we pause the movie to make popcorn as we often do,
yeah,
and Jamie had been IMDbing, and she's like, "That's Michael Caine's wife." I was like, "Of course, that totally makes sense." Um,
yeah.
so yeah, no, I mean, she's only in it for 4 minutes, something like that.
Oh, yeah,
Um,
yeah. I mean, the cast isn't big. It's pretty much Kane, Connery, I guess, sorry, Jeffrey, and then bookending it, Christopher Plummer. So it's really again, they're the main players. Nobody else
mhm.
really gets any speaking parts that much,
Yeah,
which makes sense because of course it's a different country. You can't understand them anyway. But it's interesting. Going back before I forget, so advice to John Huston to Michael Caine was because I actually watched it on a DVD, and interestingly, it turned out to be a flipper disc, which I never even knew still existed. And it just stopped halfway. Didn't even say interval, it just stopped. And I'm like, either this is broken or I have to turn the disc over. And of course, I turned the disc over and it carried on. And I'm like, this film isn't even that long. It's like 2 hours long.
yeah, that's really strange. It feels like it's left over from the Laserdisc era.
Yeah, it's like about 20 years more out of date. But my subtitles were funny as well because they were messing up some of the English slang. So so when they say to the guy, the guy they give as a gift to the king, they say, "What are they going to do with him?" And Billy Fish goes, "The women are going to cut his bollocks off." I actually had bullocks
Huh.
instead, and because they obviously don't know what bollocks are, and this is balls. That's slang for balls if you're English.
Yeah, I'm thinking that your subtitles must be like 20 years old because I think people in the States would know that now.
They've had enough Guy Ritchie since then, I think.
Yeah, I mean, literally, yes. Yeah.
They've had 20 years of Jason Stratham. It's like he's been tutoring you. But yeah, but I had that. But then, yeah, so going back to my original point, so John Huston said to Michael Caine when they first rehearsed, Michael, you can talk faster. He's an honest man. And Michael Caine said that totally showed him how to play the character, which is, this guy doesn't hold anything back. He's just totally, he's not going to hide anything. He's totally like, blah, 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 blah. And some people say Caine's performance in this was bad, but I don't think so. I think it is verging on over the top, but I think it stays the right side of that line. Um,
I find that fascinating. I'm making a face on this side of the camera. Um,
yeah.
I don't know why someone would say this was a bad performance.
Yeah, yeah. Because I think he's actually I was really impressed because early on in the film he actually says he's trying to say contact, like, I need you at the junction to go on the train to get to the junction to contact this person. He said, and he actually says contact instead of contact. And I'm like, he's actually putting a big effort into talking like a working class person, which I know that sounds funny when you mention Michael Caine, because you imagine
Yes.
him always to talk like that. But actually, if you watch Batman or whatever, he's pretty well spoken. He has an accent, but he's very well spoken. But he's actually dropping vowels on purpose to show that he hasn't had education, which I was very impressed by, actually.
Yeah, no, I think it's from both of them such a, I mean, and particularly for Connery, who you're so used to seeing in the like self-assured superhuman, not even,
Yeah.
not just in Bond, but especially if you think about his like 80s and 90s, kind of more
Yeah.
action hero-y sort of stuff.
Mm.
So
David Welcome.
self-assured. And he's not that in this. He's very much playing with the same energy that Kane is, of kind of, we're, as you said at the beginning, kind of like two rogues who are, um,
Yeah.
and so he's a little more slippery. He's a little more, there's a lot going on behind his eyes. That's not how he's plotting to break your elbow or whatever. Um, he's trying to think two steps ahead, but that's why that outburst in the administrator's office is so fascinating. Is, you know, it's really who he is at his core,
Yeah.
and so yeah, it's, and probably, he's a Scotsman, right? I mean, I'm
Yeah.
sure he knows what it's like to get kicked around.
I'm surprised Connery let it go that at some point they described as two Englishmen, actually, because I did notice that yesterday watching it. And I'm like, I wonder if Sean Connery ever went, hang on. But I guess it just fits it, You wouldn't want to like explain that, over explain that just for the sake of, Sean Connery.
Right, right. Yeah.
But Connery's more of the kind of, I guess, dreamer. And I think he's the less intelligent of the couple in the film, the characters. Because, Kane's very much the ideas man, the powerhouse. And it's so subtly done, but so well done when, Connery kind of says, I think, maybe you should start bowing to me like everybody else, just because it looks good. And you can kind of see Kane kind of hurt by that, which makes it so much better later on when, although it's his undoing because he would have left otherwise, but where, they kind of forgive each other for kind of being idiots, really. And Sean Connery, they're surrounded by all these kind of like, priests who are going to rip them apart. He's like, well, everything's okay then.
Yeah.
I've made up with my friends, so everything's okay.
It is a lovely little moment there. And Huston knew what he was doing. He was no slouch as a director, and but yeah,
yeah, great direction.
Yeah, great moment there of they get back to who they were in that moment.
Yeah, because they kind of know they're doomed. They know something bad's going to happen, and Billy Fish kind of goes out like a champion. He kind of charges in there. Yeah. I think it's quite nastily, you see his body being flung around. But, all that last 10, 15 minutes of, out of ammo, and then, and then forcing Connery onto the bridge, and then them singing together. And, and we kind of laugh at Michael Caine now in the Batman movies with his quivery, upset voice. But, when Connery falls and Michael Caine just finishes the last verse by himself, that's heartbreaking.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, for a lot of reasons. Not just the kind of like he's lost his friend, but yeah, the dream is dead officially at that point.
Yeah.
I mean, we know he's going to make it out one way or another because we've already seen him at the beginning of the film. And maybe that's the goofiest thing is like you hear Michael Caine's voice at the very beginning of the film off camera. and Plummer's like, I don't know who you are, and it's like everyone knows who that is.
I will say though, for the time though, that's great makeup
Oh, it
because
is.
only a couple of years, or only a year before this, there was Sleuth, which I know is a different kind of film, but Sleuth with Laurence Olivier, where it's so obvious the policeman's Michael Caine, with a big false nose and moustache. That watching this back to back with it, you're like, that's actually pretty good makeup. That's like, apart from the voice, you are right about the voice. It's like he's kind of unrecognizable, and he looks like a man that's basically been through a mincer and just about survived.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. They do a very very good job of yeah, making it look like they dragged his face across asphalt. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. Um, so yeah, there's like I say, there's so much going on in this. There's class, empire, militarization, exploitation of the third world. But ultimately, it's just a very entertaining film. And I think I think everybody's great now. I think Christopher Plummer's great. He has some great kind of reactions, and like I love when he's trying not to snigger when they're in front of the viceroy, and they're like, we're gonna send we're gonna send pictures of the editor and this woman. Let him put that in his paper if he's in the news. And he's trying not to laugh. Um, and Billy Fish, the fact that he's getting old by Jove, and
yeah.
the same story. Every tribe they go to says like, oh, we're having such a bad time. They come out and piss down the river, and they all keep saying the same thing.
Yeah.
It's kind of great. It's just fantastic, and of course, not forgetting the music. Maurice Jarre, I think, did the great kind of I think it's called the Minstrel Boy, but it's that great militaristic kind of like song and chant.
Yeah, and there's a really nice scene. It's a beautiful scene actually of I don't think it's one camera movement, but it's that you start seeing what you think is their little army coming down the ravine.
Yeah.
And then it just stretches and stretches and stretches. And it goes from, and I mean, they can have done this a million different ways of playing, all as ADR or whatever for the audio. But the music goes from diegetic to non-diegetic with the same tune of kind of fading from them playing their instrument, their drums and their versions of horns and all of that. And then it goes to kind of the full orchestral version of all of that as you start realizing the scope of what these guys have built. It's an absolutely remarkable scene and should be studied by the film kids of how to frame something and then do kind of a reveal. I was absolutely blown away. I understand this was filmed mostly in Morocco, but probably for a number of reasons, probably a lot safer to film in Morocco. But being able to actually get together, I mean, even you start losing movies that have giant crowd scenes in them kind of by like the mid to late 80s. And then in the 90s,
was the first one where I remember thinking, no, there's people really there.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And it's kind of the Gladiator, kind of that Phantom Menace and some other movies like that. And there was kind of this period in between there where I don't really remember having kind of massive herding of humans for a film. And as small as technically the cast is, as you were talking about, they did have for extras, they must have been like, everyone gets, $5, which is going to go really far in Morocco. And they really, and however they managed to get everybody in there, this village dresses this way, this village dresses that way. It's a remarkable shot.
Yeah, well, it's funny you should say it because I literally just looked down and I've got like great shot of Big Army. So that exactly what you said, that must have struck me as well when I watched it. And just great direction from Huston. I mean, obviously he'd been thinking about this for decades. So I'm sure he had it mapped out in his mind. But I love how, even the start of the film, it doesn't start with the credits. It doesn't start with Kane or Connery. It actually starts with kind of like, almost like a kind of montage of the weirdness of the East or India with, the guy putting scorpions in his mouth and
Hmm.
the guy with the cobra and the guy, drinking out of the boiling hot kettle. And it's showing, such difference between the East and West, and the fact that, the East is very kind of like dark and scary in a way, and there's lots of things we don't understand. And I think that all plays into it later, the fact that even though these guys are together and they're having a good time and everything's kind of working, the fact that they're like, that polo ball's a bit big, isn't it? And it's like, oh, depends on the size of the man's head. And they're like, bloody savages. In the background, there's always that threat that, when they do get found out and when this does go wrong, it's going to be really bad.
Yeah, and that's kind of depending on how you come at the film. One of the things that I think is the challenge of coming at it is colonialism equals bad, which we can have a
Hmm.
debate about that all day long. But it
Yeah.
is true. It's something that seems to have been
What
like
have the Romans ever done for us, right?
but the last 40 years we've since the world is now mapped, we can tell you the depth to the foot of most parts of the Atlantic Ocean. Like when the world was an unknown, how different all of that worked.
Mm.
I mean, we currently in this country have issues of people who are in rural areas who are totally freaked out by the idea of even walking into an American city.
Mm.
But so you can imagine what it would have been like if, say, you did grow up in the Elephant and you were suddenly dropped into the middle of India, which you've only kind of heard about in whispers, but that's where people go fight. How completely alien all of that would be to you. And
Yeah.
you're supposed to say, no, we're all the same. It's like, dude, you have no idea what is going on with people in other
Yeah.
countries for the most part. It takes
Yeah.
countries that are, England to the US, still you have a hard time figuring. I mean, that's the whole joke of the first half of the first season of Ted Lasso is him trying to navigate the minor differences. So if you get
Oh yeah.
dropped into India in the 1800s, my man, it's going to be pretty hard to figure out, and people are going to be doing things that in the bazaars and all that don't make a lot of sense to you.
And
um
the characters are supposed to have been not green. They've been there for several years, but
mhm.
the fact that Connery kind of pushes through, I think it's partly because he starts believing himself to be a god, but it's also that very English thing of we're going to do it anyway. We're going to force it through. Um, of getting married when
Yeah,
all the signs are like there's so many red flags not to do this, and of course the fact that she bites him is that's where it all starts falling apart.
they do a great set of timing on that particular thing because the audience gets it a beat before he does.
Yeah, yeah, and you can see Kane going, "We have to get out of here," and Connery's still trying to like bluster, and
Hmm.
it's like, and Kane has that great line, which is, we got brass it out, brass it out, Danny, and it's like just pretend everything's okay, and they kind of like they very quickly kind of march off. I think it says banks of swank, and of course, you can see all the priests like, what just happened? Talking to each other, and then they all kind
Hmm.
of like swarm after them. Yeah, it's great scene.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm really, really glad that we finally got to this one. The scenes that I had seen 25 years ago or whatever on cable were the scenes where he is just become actually the God King, and he's up there, making the wise decisions for people, and so there was no
Mm.
context for me. I was like, why is
Yeah,
Michael Caine and Sean Connery standing in
yeah.
front of these people in judgment? Like, I had no idea. That's when I was like, this is really interesting, but I got to go back and find out kind of what the hell the story is here. um
Oh yeah, yeah. I'm so glad you've seen it because it's definitely. I've seen it a lot, but I guess I haven't seen it for a few years. I'm watching it yesterday. I always have, I always do this. I normally recommend a film to you, and then when I actually have to sit down and watch it, I'm like, oh, I've seen this too much. I don't really want to watch it. I want to watch something new. And then, like I've said before, the sign of a good film is within about 5 minutes, I think you're pulled into it.
Mm-hmm.
And yesterday watching this, I thoroughly enjoyed it again. It was fantastic. Every minute of it. I don't think any minutes kind of wasted in this film, which again is a sign of a great film.
Especially for one that breathes like this.
Yeah, yeah.
It's not rushed.
It's not rushed. And, the funny thing is, the tagline for it was, long live adventure and adventurers. But there's not really much action in it, It's like, it's pretty much just two guys talking most of the time. But I think they're so entertaining. And I've got a couple of little things I just should mention. So Joe Powell did the drop off the bridge at the end, which was apparently an 80-foot drop. Very dangerous stunt. So Sean Connery's got fear of heights, and basically, like, he went to John Huston and said, do you think there's something wrong with the bridge? And John Huston said, the bridge is exactly the same as it was yesterday, Sean. The only difference is today you've got to stand in the middle of it. So apparently he did go and do it, and but he wasn't very happy about it.
I did see him put his hand on the rope as he was walking.
Yeah.
In the scene.
Yeah. And that, I'm sure that's not half as high as it's supposed to be in the film, but it's still kind of scary. I think road bridges in general are scary.
Yes, they are. They're horrible to walk across. Yeah.
Yeah. But no, yeah, I totally recommend this film. I'm really kind of glad that you've seen it. And if you want to see kind of Pete Connery and Pete Kane, they always talked about doing something else together. And actually, they want to do something with Roger Moore as well, the three of them. Sadly, I guess they never found a decent script, But I know this is Kane's favorite film. I think it may be Connery's favorite film as well. I think I've heard that in interviews, partly because, they were good friends. But they obviously had a blast,
Yeah, I do think, it comes from older source material. I think that when watching it, if you've not seen the movie before, parts of it will feel familiar because they have been borrowed from. I'm not going to say that you're never going to have seen anything like this before. No. But I think it's the completeness of what the story is and what it's about that I think really sets it apart from other things that kind of explore some of the corners that this movie gets into. But yeah, I if you want to see a director who's absolutely still at the top of their game at this point, see two of the best performers that you remember from the 20th century, this is definitely the one to do. And just kind of listen to what's actually happening in the movie and don't necessarily come at it with colonialism equals bad. I mean, this movie isn't arguing that point. This movie is trying to do something kind of different with that idea. So, I mean,
I don't think you can watch it with modern eyes. And I think, you can remember that the characters do get their just desserts. I mean, it ends very badly. But I think, John Huston, supposedly, I think Michael Caine said in his book, just a nice little story to kind of finish on, is John Huston was kind of in and out of hospital, or actually all his life, but especially in the 80s, I think. And basically Michael Caine and Sean Connery went to see him to cheer him up. And when they walked in, John Huston went, "Look who's come to see me, it's Peachy and Danny." And Michael Caine said, basically, that's all he would call us from pretty much from when we made the film. He does keep calling us our character names. So that's just a nice little detail.
Yeah. Anyway, thanks again for recommending it. And if you guys haven't seen it, I'm amazed you sat through the podcast, but but nonetheless, I would definitely recommend the film. It was absolutely terrific.
Cool.
All right. Well, we'll be back soon. We only have a few weeks here before we have to start getting into the holidays, but wanted to make sure we had some continuity between the Halloween season and getting more into Christmassy sort of stuff. So I hope you enjoyed it. Simon, thank you so much.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.
That about wraps it up for this edition of The Signal Watch, a production of the League of Melbotus. Thanks for sticking with us. If you enjoyed the podcast, we invite you to drop on by the Signal Watch blog, where you'll find write-ups of a wide variety of movies and more. We'd love to hear from you, so find us online and let us know what you think. Whether you prefer email, blog comments, or social media, we'll be happy to hear from you. We'll be back soon with more exceedingly high-quality content. So, until next time, God damn it, babies, you've got to be kind.